The night of November 14th started like every other night for Dr. Marcus Carter. He had worked a 12-hour shift. He had eaten a cold sandwich at his desk at 7 p.m. because there was no time for anything else. He had reviewed 3 patient charts, signed off on 2 post-operative reports, and was walking toward the parking garage at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center when his phone rang at 11:09 p.m. He almost didn't answer it. The number was the direct line from the White House Medical Unit, a line that had rung exactly 4 times in Dr. Carter's career. Each time it rang, something serious had happened. Each time it rang, Doctor. Carter had answered it and driven to Walter Reed and done his job and gone home and not spoken about it to anyone, because that was the agreement, and that was the clearance, and that was the life he had chosen when he accepted the position. He answered it on the second ring. The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel Patricia Sims, the Chief Medical Officer of the White House Medical Unit. Her voice was controlled in the way that military doctors learn to be controlled: flat, precise, no extra words. But Dr. Carter had worked with Colonel Sims for 6 years, and he could hear, underneath the flatness, the thing that military doctors are not supposed to let through: fear. "Marcus," she said, "the president is in cardiac arrest. We've stabilized him temporarily at the residence. We are transporting to Walter Reed now. ETA, 18 minutes. The surgical team is being assembled. You need to be scrubbed in and ready." Doctor Carter was already walking faster. "What are we looking at?" "Acute aortic dissection. Type A. It happened during dinner. He complained of chest pain, went down 3 minutes later. We got him back, but the window is closing. You are the only surgeon on the cleared list who can do this tonight." Doctor Carter pushed through the stairwell door instead of waiting for the elevator. "I'm 20 minutes out. I'll be there." "Make it 15, Colonel Sims said, and the line went dead. He made it to his car in 4 minutes. He pulled out of the parking garage at 11:14 p.m. onto the Federal Corridor, the wide, mostly empty stretch of highway that connected Walter Reed to the downtown core. At that hour, the road was nearly deserted. Dr. Carter pressed the accelerator down and drove. His White House medical clearance card was on the passenger seat. He always kept it there when he was on call, a habit from early in his career, a way of making sure it was visible and accessible if he was ever pulled over during an emergency response. His Walter Reed Hospital badge was clipped to his lapel. His white coat, folded, was on top of the clearance card. The embroidery on the breast pocket read, "Dr. Marcus A. Carter, MD Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery." Everything was visible. Everything was right there. He was driving 79 miles per hour in a 65 zone when the lights appeared in his rear-view mirror at 11:47 p.m. Blue and red, rotating. ADC. Metro Patrol Cruiser pulling out from a side road and accelerating to close the gap. Dr. Carter's hands tightened on the wheel. He took one breath. Then he pulled over immediately, turned off his engine, and placed both hands on top of the steering wheel, where they could be clearly seen. He had done this before, not because he had ever done anything wrong, because he was a black man in America, and he had learned the way all black men learn, usually early, usually from someone who loves them, that the first thing you show a police officer is your hands. Not your credentials, not your innocence, your hands. Everything else comes after, if you're lucky and careful and say the right things in the right tone. He watched in the side mirror as Officer Dale Hutchins got out of the patrol car. Hutchins was 41 years old, 11-year veteran of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, assigned to the Federal Corridor night shift. He walked toward the Mercedes with his flashlight in one hand, and his other hand resting on his belt. His body camera was active. The timestamp read 11:48 p.m. He did not run the plates before he got out of the car. This fact would later be one of the most discussed details of the entire case, because running the plates would have taken 30 seconds and would have returned a result that flagged the vehicle as registered to a White House cleared personnel. It would have changed everything that happened next. The department's own protocol required officers to run plates before approaching a stopped vehicle on the Federal Corridor. It was not optional. It was not a suggestion. It was a written rule, trained and retrained, specifically because of the sensitive nature of the personnel and facilities in that zone. Hutchins did not do it. He reached the driver's window. "Doctor." Carter had already rolled it down. "Officer." "Doctor," Carter said. keeping his voice calm and clear. "I am a surgeon at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. I have a federal medical emergency. I need you to verify my credentials and let me go. A patient is in critical condition, and I am the only surgeon assigned to this procedure." He kept both hands on the wheel as he spoke. He did not reach for anything. He nodded toward the passenger seat. "My clearance card and hospital ID are right there, visible." Hutchins shone his flashlight into the car. It swept across the passenger seat. It landed directly on the White House medical clearance card, the laminated federal document with Dr. Carter's photograph, his clearance level, his designation, and the gold seal of the executive office. It was impossible to miss. It was the size of a standard ID card, and it was sitting on top of a white coat in an otherwise clean, uncluttered seat. Hutchins looked at it for 2 full seconds. Then he looked back at Dr. Carter. "Step out of the vehicle, Doctor." Carter did not move immediately. "Officer, please call Walter Reed. The number is printed on my badge. They will confirm everything I am telling you in under 60 seconds. I am asking you to make one call. I'm not going to ask you again. Step out of the vehicle, now." Something shifted in the air. Doctor. Carter recognized it. He had been in enough difficult rooms in his life to know when a situation has passed the point where words can stop it. He opened the door slowly. He stepped out with his hands raised, his badge catching the beam of the flashlight. Hutchins grabbed him by the collar of his jacket and turned him toward the hood of the car. "Doctor. Marcus Carter, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery, White House cleared federal medical officer, the only man who could save the president's life that night, was face down on the hood of his own Mercedes at 11:49 p.m. The body camera was still rolling. The clearance card was still visible through the windshield. And somewhere across the city, in a room at Walter Reed, a surgical team was assembled and waiting, watching the clock, and a man's heart was running out of time. What happened in the next 7 minutes would later be analyzed by use-of-force experts, constitutional law professors, federal investigators, and 2 separate congressional subcommittees. It would be replayed in courtrooms, taught in law schools, and discussed in medical ethics conferences. Every second of it was captured on 3 separate recording systems: Hutchins' body camera, Dr. Carter's dash cam, which had activated automatically when the patrol lights appeared in his rear view, and an exterior security camera mounted above the door of a 2 4-hour pharmacy located in the strip mall adjacent to the stop. Hutchins handcuffed Dr. Carter at 11:49 p.m. Dr. Carter did not resist. He kept his voice level. "Officer, I understand you have a job to do, but I need you to hear me. The patient I am going to operate on tonight will not survive. If I am not in that operating room in the next 25 minutes, please call the number on my badge. You can explain everything at the precinct," Hutchins said. "There won't be time." Hutchins walked back toward his patrol car. His body camera recorded him opening the door, sitting in the driver's seat, and beginning to type Dr. Carter's license plate into the system. Not the White House cleared personnel database, the standard DMV lookup. The one that would show him the car was registered to a Marcus A. Carter, with a clean driving record and a DC address, which is exactly what it showed. Hutchins stared at it. Then he started writing the speeding citation. Outside, Dr. Carter stood at the hood of the Mercedes in handcuffs, the body camera on his lapel badge, a small recording device that Walter Reed issued to all senior surgical staff for exactly these kinds of situations. A detail that the defense would spend considerable time trying to suppress was recording from his perspective. It captured him looking at the clock display on his car's dashboard through the windshield. 11:51 p.m., 11:52, 11:53. He was thinking about the aorta, specifically about the dissection, the tear in the inner wall of the aorta that, if it extended to the coronary arteries, would become inoperable. He was calculating. He had 18 minutes before that window began to close, in a way that even the best surgery in the world might not fix. He was standing handcuffed on the shoulder of a federal highway, with a speeding citation being written inside a patrol car 20 feet away. At 11:54 p.m., a car slowed on the opposite side of the highway. The driver had seen the flashing lights and the man in handcuffs and the white coat visible on the passenger seat of the Mercedes. The driver was a nurse she would later give a sworn statement who had been coming off a night shift at Georgetown University Hospital. She slowed because something felt wrong to her. She could not articulate it more precisely than that. Something felt wrong. She noted the badge on the man's lapel. She noted the white coat. She drove on, and then she pulled over a quarter-mile up the road and sat for a moment, and then she called the Walter Reed main line and asked if they were missing a surgeon. This call would later be described by Renee Holloway, doctor, Carter's attorney, as the moment the clock started running on Hutchins' career. At 11:55 p.m., Hutchins's radio crackled. Then his personal cell phone rang. Then the radio crackled again, and this time it was not dispatch. It was his captain's direct line, which Hutchins had heard exactly twice in 11 years, both times in situations that had required him to stop what he was doing immediately and pay full attention. He picked up. Captain Gerald Reeves's voice was the kind of voice that had spent 30 years learning not to show panic and was, in this moment, failing. "Hutchins, where is Doctor? Marcus Carter, answer me right now." Hutchins looked out through his windshield at the man in handcuffs leaning against the hood of the Mercedes. "I have a subject detained on the federal corridor. Black male. Speeding violation. I'm processing the citation. That man is the president's surgeon." The words came out flat and hard, like they had been compressed under pressure. "Walter Reed has been trying to reach him for 6 minutes. The Secret Service has called this department twice. The White House medical unit is on hold with the chief right now. The President of the United States is on an operating table, and the only surgeon cleared for the procedure is standing in handcuffs on the side of a highway because you did not run his plates." The speeding citation was still in Hutchins' hand. He looked at it. He looked at the clearance card visible through the windshield of the Mercedes. "Release him," the captain said. "Right now. Get him to Walter Reed. Do not speak. Do not explain. Do not write anything down. Just get him there." Hutchins got out of the car. The body camera captured him walking back to Dr. Carter. It captured him reaching for the handcuff key. It captured the moment the cuffs came off. And it captured something that would become one of the most discussed frames in the entire case, the look on Dr. Carter's face when he turned around. Not relief, not anger, not vindication, pure focus. The face of a man who had already moved on, who was already in the operating room in his mind, who had filed away everything that had just happened into a compartment that he would deal with later, because right now there was exactly one thing that mattered, and it was not this. "I need to go, Doctor," Carter said quietly. He got in his car. He drove. The body camera recorded Hutchins standing alone on the shoulder of the highway, watching the Mercedes disappear into the night. It recorded him looking down at the speeding citation still in his hand. And then, this detail was noted by every legal analyst who reviewed the footage it recorded, him looking directly at the White House medical clearance card, still visible through the windshield even as the car pulled away. He had seen it the whole time. What nobody knew yet, what would not emerge until 3 weeks later, when a second piece of evidence surfaced that nobody had expected, was that the night was not over. Not for Hutchins, and not for Dr. Carter. Dr. Marcus Carter arrived at Walter Reed at 12:03 a.m., 11 minutes late. He parked in the emergency bay, left the car running, and was through the doors before the security desk could process his entry. The surgical team was in pre-op 2, assembled and ready, faces masked, eyes tracking him as he walked in. The room had the particular quality of tension that surgical spaces develop when a patient is critical, and everyone is waiting for the one person who can fix it, a tightness in the air, a stillness in the bodies, the particular silence of professionals who are not panicking because panicking is a luxury they cannot afford. Colonel Sims was at the head of the prep table. She looked at him. She did not ask where he had been. There was no time. Type A dissection, extending toward the right coronary, she said, walking beside him toward the scrub room. "We've kept him stable, but the BP is dropping. The window is still open, but it's narrowing." "Doctor." Carter nodded. He pushed through the scrub room door. He stood at the sink and turned on the water and began the scrub protocol, the standardized, timed process of surgical hand preparation that he had performed thousands of times, so automatic that his hands could do it while his mind was somewhere else entirely. His hands were shaking, not visibly, not in any way that anyone watching him would have seen, but he felt it, the tremor in his fingers, the slight unsteadiness that comes from adrenaline and anger and humiliation all arriving at once in a body that has been trained to suppress all three. He had been thrown against a car. He had been handcuffed on a federal highway while a patient waited. He had watched an officer look directly at his credentials and choose to ignore them. And now he was here, exactly where he was supposed to be, scrubbing in for the most consequential surgery of his career, and his hands were shaking. He stood at that sink for 12 seconds longer than the protocol required. He breathed. He found the stillness. He had been finding it his entire career in operating rooms in the middle of the night, in moments when everything was going wrong, in the years before this, when he had walked into hospitals where patients looked at him with doubt in their eyes before he had spoken a word, and he had found the stillness then, too. He had built his entire professional life on the ability to find stillness under pressure. He found it now. When he walked into the operating room, his hands were steady. The surgery lasted 6 hours and 14 minutes. The president's aorta was repaired through a procedure that required the kind of precision that comes only from years of repetition at the highest level, a procedure that Dr. Carter had performed in various forms over 200 times, that he could have done in his sleep, that he did, on this night, perfectly. The surgical team would later describe it in their notes with the clinical language of medicine, words like successful repair and stable post-operative status and excellent prognosis. None of those words came close to capturing what had actually happened in that room. The president survived because Dr. Marcus Carter got there in time. He got there 11 minutes late. The margin between that 11-minute delay and a fatal outcome, the specific window within which the dissection would have become inoperable, was later calculated by 2 independent cardiologists, under oath as approximately 9 minutes. 2 minutes. The president's life had balanced on 2 minutes. At 6:21 a.m., Doctor. Carter stepped out of the operating room. He walked to the scrub room. He sat down on the metal bench against the wall. He put his hands in his lap. He looked at nothing. The attending nurse who found him 20 minutes later said later that she almost didn't come in, that something about the way he was sitting made her feel like she was interrupting something private. She had worked with Dr. Carter for 4 years. She had never seen him sit like that. She asked if he was okay. He looked up at her. "I'm fine," he said. "Thank you." He went home. He showered. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold while he stared at the wall. And then, at 9 a.m., he picked up the phone and called Renee Holloway. He had known Renee Holloway for 3 years. She was a civil rights attorney with the ACLU of the District of Columbia, 17 years of litigation experience, the kind of lawyer who had seen enough constitutional violations to be angry about them, but not so many that she had stopped being angry. She had given a talk at a medical ethics conference 2 years earlier about the specific legal vulnerabilities of black medical professionals during police encounters. And Dr. Carter had been in the audience and had introduced himself afterward and given her his card. He had hoped he would never need to use her number. "Tell me everything," she said, "from the beginning." He did. When he finished, there was a silence on the line. Then Renee Holloway said, in a tone that was very quiet and very controlled, "Do you know if the body cameras were recording?" "Yes, Doctor," Carter said. "Mine was too." Another silence. "Marcus," she said, "this is not just a case. This is going to be a landmark." What she didn't tell him yet, what she would discover 2 weeks later when she obtained the footage, was that there was a third camera, one that neither Hutchins nor Dr. Carter had known about, one that had captured an angle that would change the entire case. Before we go further, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments, and if you're new here, hit subscribe, because what this camera captured is something that every single American needs to see. Renee Holloway filed for the body camera footage under D.C.'s public records law on the morning after Dr. Carter's call. Standard procedure. Expected timeline of 3 to 4 weeks for release. She also filed immediately for Hutchins' full personnel, file his complaint history, his disciplinary record, his training certifications. What came back in the personnel file, 2 days later, was the first unexpected twist. 9 civilian complaints in 11 years. This was already known. What was not known, what had never been made public, what the department had buried in a file that required 3 separate FOIA requests to fully uncover, was that 2 of those complaints had come from medical personnel. One from a nurse who had been pulled over on the same federal corridor 18 months earlier and detained for 45 minutes, despite displaying her hospital ID. One from a paramedic who had been stopped during an emergency transport run and physically removed from an ambulance while Hutchins reviewed his credentials. Both complainants were black. Both complaints had been reviewed, marked officer conduct within policy guidelines, and filed away. Both complainants had been told the same thing. The officer had followed proper protocol. There was nothing to investigate. Holloway read through both files at her desk at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday night and sat very still for a long time. Then she opened a new document and started typing the federal complaint. The body camera footage arrived 3 weeks after the initial request. Both Hutchins' camera, and this was the unexpected part, a second recording from the dashcam mounted in the patrol car, which had been active the entire time, and which the department had not flagged in the initial release. Holloway's paralegal found it while cataloging the files. It had been included in the disclosure, but mislabeled, filed under a routine traffic stop code, instead of under the incident report number for the Carter stop. Whether this was an accident or intentional, the court would later spend considerable time deciding. The dashcam footage showed something the body cameras had not captured from their angles. It showed the interior of Hutchins' patrol car during the 7 minutes he was inside writing the citation. It showed him opening his in-car database. It showed him entering Dr. Carter's plate number. It showed the result coming back, the same result that flagged the vehicle as registered to a White House-cleared personnel, the result that should have prompted immediate verification before any physical contact was made. Hutchins had seen the flag. It was right there on the dashcam. His eyes moved to it. There was a pause, 3 seconds, recorded precisely, and then he minimized the window and opened the citation form. He had seen the White House personnel flag. He had seen it, paused on it for 3 seconds, and then proceeded to write a speeding citation and leave a federal medical officer in handcuffs on the side of the highway. When Holloway watched this footage for the first time, she called Dr. Carter at 1 a.m. "Are you awake?" "Yes." The dashcam shows him seeing the White House flag. Before the handcuffs, he knew. The silence on the other end of the line lasted a long time. "How long?" "Doctor," Carter finally asked. 3 seconds. He looked at it for 3 seconds, and then he closed it. Another silence. Then, "Okay." Just that. "Okay." The single syllable of a man who has suspected something his entire life and has just been handed proof of it, and is not surprised, and is also devastated, and is also somehow still okay. But the third camera, that was what nobody had expected. The pharmacy. A 2-4-hour independent pharmacy in the strip mall, adjacent to the stop site, owned by a man named George Watkins, who had installed a high-definition exterior security system 18 months earlier, after a break-in. The camera above the pharmacy's front door was angled to cover the parking lot and the adjacent stretch of road. It had captured the entire stop from a wide angle: the pullover, the approach, the confrontation at the window, the grab, the handcuffs, the patrol car, the radio call, the release. Holloway obtained the footage through a direct request to George Watkins, who turned it over the same day she called. He had been watching the news coverage of the case since it became public. He had recognized the stretch of road immediately. He had been waiting for someone to ask. The pharmacy camera angle showed 2 things the body cameras had missed entirely. First, the exact moment Hutchins' flashlight landed on the White House clearance card through the windshield of the Mercedes. From the wide-angle exterior view, you could see the beam of light sweep across the passenger seat and stop. You could see it hold there, and then you could see it move away, up to Dr. Carter's face, before Hutchins said a single word. Second, after Hutchins had handcuffed Dr. Carter and returned to his patrol car, the pharmacy camera captured a moment that the body cameras both pointed away at that point had not recorded. A moment where Hutchins got out of his patrol car, walked around to the passenger side, looked through the windshield of the Mercedes at the clearance card and the white coat from the outside, stood there for approximately 8 seconds, and then walked back to his car and continued writing the citation. He had confirmed, manually and deliberately, that the credentials were real, and he had continued anyway. When this footage was shown in the courtroom, the judge had to call a recess. The trial of Dr. Marcus Carter versus the City of Washington, D.C., Officer Dale Hutchins, and the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department opened on a Monday morning in January, 14 months after the night of the stop. The courtroom was full from the first day. Civil rights organizations had coalition-organized attendance. The American Medical Association had filed a friend of the court brief, an unusual step, representing the first time in the AMA's history that the organization had taken a formal position in a police misconduct civil case. Medical schools, nursing associations, and hospital networks across the country had submitted supporting statements. The case had become national in a way that neither Holloway nor Dr. Carter had fully anticipated, not because of who the patient had been that night, but because of what the case represented for every black medical professional who had ever walked into a room and been looked at wrong before they had said a word. The media coverage had created a second, unexpected problem for the defense. The nurse, who had slowed down on the highway that night, had gone public. Her name was Diane Okafor. She had given an interview to the Washington Post 2 months before the trial, describing what she had seen: the man in handcuffs, the white coat on the passenger seat, the badge. She said she had known immediately that something was wrong. She said she had called Walter Reed because it was the only thing she could think to do. She said she had wondered ever since whether, if she had been the one in handcuffs, anyone would have called for her. The interview had been shared 3 million times. Holloway opened with the footage. All 3 sources: body camera, dash cam, pharmacy exterior, played simultaneously on a split screen in front of the jury. 12 jurors, 7 women, 5 men, 9 of them people of color, all of them residents of a city that had been having this exact conversation about its police department for years, watched every second in complete silence. They watched Hutchins' flashlight land on the clearance card. They watched the 3-second pause on the White House personnel flag in the dash cam. They watched the 8 seconds outside the passenger window of the Mercedes. They watched Dr. Carter's face against the hood of the car. They watched the captain's call. They watched the handcuffs come off. They watched it twice. Holloway asked permission to play it twice. The judge granted it. 4 jurors were visibly crying by the end of the second viewing. Dr. Carter testified for 4.5 hours over 2 days. He was precise, articulate, and completely without performance. He did not dramatize. He did not editorialize. He described the night the way a surgeon describes a complication factually, chronologically, with clinical attention to detail. When Holloway asked him to describe the moment the handcuffs came off and what he had been thinking, he paused for a long time before answering. "I was thinking about the coronary anatomy," he said, "specifically about the right coronary artery and whether the dissection had extended to it. I had been thinking about it the whole time I was standing there. I couldn't think about anything else, because if I thought about what was actually happening to me, I would not have been able to function. So I thought about the surgery instead." The courtroom was very quiet. "Did you know," Holloway asked, "that the margin between when you arrived at Walter Reed and when the surgery would have become inoperable was approximately 9 minutes? "Yes, I learned that from the post-operative analysis. Which means, if you had been held for 2 additional minutes, the president would have died." "Yes." More silence. Holloway let it sit. The defense had 2 primary strategies. The first was qualified immunity, arguing that Hutchins could have reasonably believed his actions were lawful given the information he had at the time. The second was an attempt to reframe the 3-second dashcam pause as ambiguous, to argue that a White House personnel flag was not the same as a confirmed White House medical clearance, that Hutchins could not have known what the flag meant without further investigation, that his decision to proceed was therefore reasonable. Holloway destroyed both. On qualified immunity, she called Professor Alicia Marsh from Georgetown University Law Center, one of the leading constitutional scholars in the country on Fourth Amendment jurisprudence. Professor Marsh testified for 3 hours. She was methodical, accessible, and devastating. She explained, in language that any juror could understand, that demanding a person exit their vehicle and physically restraining them constitutes a seizure under Fourth Amendment law, that a seizure requires reasonable, articulable suspicion of criminal activity, that speeding a traffic infraction does not in itself create grounds for physical restraint without additional indicators of danger, that the presence of clearly visible federal credentials does not eliminate the need for reasonable suspicion, it eliminates it entirely, and that an officer who sees a White House personnel flag in a database, pauses on it for 3 seconds, and then proceeds to handcuff the driver has not made a reasonable mistake. He has made an intentional choice. Qualified immunity, Professor Marsh said, protects officers from liability for mistakes made in good faith under unclear law. It does not protect an officer who saw the law clearly, understood it clearly, and chose to violate it clearly. The evidence in this case shows exactly that sequence. On the dash cam ambiguity argument, Holloway called the DC, Metro's own training coordinator, a man named Lieutenant James Pollard, who had written the Federal Corridor Protocol that required plate checks before approach. Holloway asked him, simply, what a White House personnel flag in the department's database indicated. It indicates, Pollard said, that the vehicle is registered to an individual with active federal security clearance at the White House level. Protocol requires immediate verification contact with the White House Security Office or the relevant federal agency before any physical interaction. And if an officer sees that flag and does not make that call, he is in violation of the protocol. Was Officer Hutchins trained on this protocol? Yes. He completed the Federal Corridor certification twice, most recently 14 months before the incident. Holloway turned to the jury. He knew the protocol. He saw the flag. He did not make the call. She paused. He made a different choice. The defense attorney, a sharp and experienced litigator named Thomas Bryce, made his closing argument with everything he had. He talked about the difficulty of split-second decisions. He talked about the impossibility of perfect judgment under pressure. He talked about the 14 other times Hutchins had successfully de-escalated dangerous situations on the federal corridor, trying to build a portrait of an officer who was, on balance, good at his job. Holloway's closing took 47 minutes, and was later described by a legal journalist who covered the trial as the finest courtroom argument she had witnessed in 20 years. Officer Hutchins did not make a mistake, she said. Mistakes happen in the dark, in confusion, with incomplete information. Officer Hutchins had complete information. He had a White House clearance card visible through the windshield. He had a hospital badge on Dr. Carter's lapel. He had a database flag that told him exactly who he was dealing with. He had Dr. Carter's voice, calm and clear, telling him that a patient was dying and asking him to make one call. She paused. He had everything. And he chose to handcuff a black man anyway, not because the evidence pointed to danger, because the evidence pointed to a black man in an expensive car on a federal highway after midnight, and in 11 years on this force, that had always been enough. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 20 minutes. When they came back, the foreman, a retired schoolteacher from Northeast Washington, a woman who had lived in this city her entire life, stood and read the verdict in a voice that did not waver, liable on all counts. The room erupted. The damages phase lasted 9 days. The jury heard from a psychiatrist who had treated Dr. Carter for 8 months following the incident. She described the specific psychological profile of what she called credential trauma, the particular injury sustained by high-achieving black professionals when their accomplishments are rendered meaningless by racial bias. She described the way Dr. Carter had struggled to drive the federal corridor after the incident, the nights he had been called in for emergencies and had sat in the parking garage for minutes before he could make himself pull onto the highway. She described the intrusive memories, the recalibrated threat assessment that now activated every time he saw patrol lights in his rearview mirror, the professional disruption of a surgeon who had spent his entire career finding stillness under pressure and was now, for the first time, unable to find it reliably. The jury heard from a medical economics expert who calculated the damage to Dr. Carter's career trajectory, the speaking engagements he had declined, the professional association roles he had stepped back from, the academic publishing he had delayed. The number was precise and large. The jury heard from 2 cardiologists who testified about the 9-minute margin. This testimony was not about damages in the legal sense. It was about something harder to quantify, the specific weight of knowing that a man had been handcuffed on a highway while a patient's life balanced on minutes, and that the only thing that had stood between the patient and death was the 11-minute arrival instead of the 13, the 5-minute surgery window instead of the 2. The jury heard from George Watkins, the pharmacy owner who had turned over the exterior footage. He testified not about the footage itself, but about what he had seen from inside his store that night. A man in handcuffs, a white coat on the passenger seat, a patrol car sitting with its lights going while the driver wrote a citation. He said he had not called anyone because he had not known what to do, and that he had thought about it every night since. And then the jury heard from something nobody had expected. Diane Okafor, the nurse who had called Walter Reed from the side of the highway that night, testified about a conversation she had had with her teenage son on the drive home from her shift the morning after the story became public. Her son had asked her what had happened. She had told him. He had listened carefully, and then he had said, "Mom, what would have happened if he wasn't the president's doctor?" She repeated the question to the jury. What would have happened if he wasn't the president's doctor? The courtroom was silent. Holloway let the silence last a full 15 seconds before she said, "No further questions." The jury came back with the damages figure on a Thursday morning, $22.4 million. $8 million in compensatory damages covering lost earnings, the cost of psychological treatment, the specific and documented harm to Dr. Carter's professional standing and personal well-being. $14.4 million in punitive damages, calculated not arbitrarily but specifically. The jury foreman explained this in a post-verdict statement based on the 9 prior complaints against Hutchins, each of which had resulted in no meaningful discipline, each of which represented an institutional failure that had made the night of November 14th not just possible but, in the jury's assessment, inevitable. "We didn't pick a number," the foreman said. "We picked a message. It was the largest civil rights verdict against a D.C. Metro officer in the history of the department." Hutchins was terminated before the end of the business day. His police union filed an appeal, which was settled out of court 14 months later, with the termination upheld. 3 other officers connected to the complaint review failures were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The department's complaint review process for medical personnel encounters was suspended pending a full audit by the Department of Justice. The DOJ audit took 11 months and produced a 340-page report that found systemic failures in the review of complaints involving black medical professionals on the federal corridor. The report recommended comprehensive reforms, mandatory Fourth Amendment retraining with specific emphasis on federal personnel protocol, independent oversight of complaint review, and body camera audit protocols for all stops involving federal corridor encounters. Congress held hearings. Dr. Carter testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. He was precise, factual, and entirely without anger in his public presentation. The same stillness he brought to the operating room brought now to a different kind of difficult room. He was asked, at the end of his testimony, what he wanted people to take away from his case. He thought for a moment. "I want people to understand that this case is not about me," he said. "I survived this because I was the president's surgeon. The cameras were rolling. The captain called. The margin was 2 minutes instead of 0. I got lucky in a dozen ways that most people don't get. The black man driving home from a regular job tonight, he doesn't have a White House clearance card. He doesn't have a captain calling in. He doesn't have a pharmacy camera on the corner. He just has his rights. And the question this case asks, the question I want this country to actually answer, is whether those rights are enough." The body camera footage, the dash cam footage, and the pharmacy exterior recording were submitted to the federal law enforcement training centers and incorporated into the national training curriculum for new officers. The 3-camera split-screen Hutchins looking at the clearance card, the 3-second pause on the database flag, the 8 seconds outside the passenger window became one of the most widely shown training sequences in the program's history. George Watkins, the pharmacy owner, was asked in an interview whether he had known his camera would matter when he installed it. He said no. He said he had installed it because someone had broken into his store and he had wanted to protect his inventory. "Sometimes," he said, "the camera catches more than you are watching for." Dr. Carter used a substantial portion of his settlement to establish the Carter Medical Equity Fund, providing legal representation and professional support to black medical professionals facing discrimination in clinical, institutional, and law enforcement contexts. In its first 2 years of operation, the fund supported 63 cases in 21 states. He still performs surgery at Walter Reed. He still drives the federal corridor. He still passes the spot on the highway where it happened, the shoulder where the Mercedes sat, The strip mall with the pharmacy, the stretch of road that looks like every other stretch of road and is, now, different from every other stretch of road. He has never spoken publicly about what those drives feel like. He doesn't have to, because on a Tuesday night in November, on a federal highway in Washington, D.C., a body camera was rolling, a dash cam was recording, and a pharmacy owner had installed a camera that was pointed at the road. And what they captured, the 3 seconds, the 8 seconds, the clearance card in the flashlight beam, answered a question that people had been asking for a very long time. Not the question of whether it happens, the question of whether, when it does, anyone sees it. This time, everyone did. If this story stayed with you, if Diane Okafor's son's question stayed with you, share this. Because the man driving home tonight without a White House clearance card deserves to know his rights are real. Subscribe. Because tomorrow we have another story, and the cameras were rolling for that one too.